Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Wake Up with Toastmasters. My name is Gina Williams. I'm your district director for District 115, which is Southern Nevada and a little piece of Utah. And my Friday co-host, Carol Wayman. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Jean. Thanks for having me back.
Well, how's the East Coast?
It's been beautiful weather here in the 60s. And there's a lot going on in the Capitol, as you can tell on the House side.
We have rain and cold here. Of course, we think it's cold when it's in the 60s, but
60s is balmy for us. Our folks in the north of Nevada, they are really struggling.
Oh, man. Welcome. So one reminder, quick, tomorrow is the online TLI. There's all sorts of information gone out about it. You should have already received your information to register. If you haven't, let us know. We'll get that to you. But that'll be online tomorrow starting at 8 a.m. and that's Pacific time. So that will be fun. And let's see, today you had an idea of talking about storytelling. So I'll let you get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Jean. And I thought about this topic because so much of what we learn in Toastmasters is how to tell better stories and how to mine our life for stories that are inspiring or humorous. And I thought a lot about this after hearing Alex Edelman's Just for Us, which is a performance that I heard at Woolly Mammoth, which is a theater here in Washington, D.C. And it was sold out. People just raved about Alex's show. And one of the things he does in the show is he's a stand-up comic, but he's not your typical stand-up comic who just stands in one place. He's very kinetic around the stage. He's always moving. He's creating imaginary people. He has props, which are 3 stools that move around. It was just a stunning piece of work. It was about 95 minutes of just him on stage telling stories from his life. And they were really well done. And as we were going through it, at one point he said, "Oh, let me fix that story." He said, "I said Katie, didn't I? Or Kelly, I can't remember which one, Kelly." And we're like, "Yeah," everybody in the audience says, "Yes." There's hundreds of people in the audience. He said, "Yeah, I promised my mom when I told this story for This American Life, I wasn't going to use this woman's real name." So then he went back and recorded it. And he was recording it for This American Life, the radio show, this radio program on NPR, American Public Radio, that's every Sunday in Washington, D.C., where I live. And it's just wonderful stories, captivating stories about people's lives. And he was recording it for their Christmas weekend. And they pulled it out and put it on, and it was just incredible. It was one of the best stories that American Life has ever published. And it's getting raves. And I'm going to put it in the chat so that people can hear it. And the story is his childhood experience learning about Christmas. Yeah, he's a Jewish kid, grew up Orthodox Jewish in Boston. And it's about learning about Christmas. And the way he creates these characters and creates tension and releases tension, creates tension, releases tension, and just creates a visual imagery is just wonderful.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing how many, we learn our language from storytelling, from our parents telling us stories, and we go on to tell other people's stories. And I think that's how I think most people communicate the best, is by telling stories.
Especially around the holiday season, it's a time where people get together. And there's obviously a lot of Christmas movies and Christmas stories. I also just put in the chat the season's Griot, Kwanzaa radio program. That, if you wanted to hear more about, stories of Kwanzaa and how to celebrate that, they have some ideas there. And I'll put the link in there. And then I don't know, have you ever heard David Sedaris's account of working as an elf at Macy's in New York? Have you ever heard that one?
No, I have not.
It was many years ago that this was published, and it's a hilarious piece, and it sort of really inspired people to think more about stories, write more insightful pieces, uncover. One of the things I loved about Toastmasters is I learned about, you're not adding humor, you're uncovering humor. You're taking what is just, a story. In Alex's Edelman, for example, it's a story about his brother being think it was luge, a luge competitor at the Winter Games for Israel. And so obviously that's just like a fact. But then how he uncovers stories about why does Israel even have a luge? Does Israel even have winter? And he just sort of creates a whole thing into it. And that was really interesting and funny. And one of the things that I know we try to do in Toastmasters is give people space to tell stories. And how do you encourage stories among your family? I know when I was with my family over the holidays, it was really tough to get some stories from people. I mean, some of them, the teenagers, are kind of monosyllabic. Tell me about your friends at school. They're cool, Or I'd ask my uncle, I'm like, so what was it like in Cleveland in the 1930s? Or do you remember the war, World War II? And he's like, no. So like, how do you elicit stories with better questions? And I really work hard on that. I don't know if you have better luck on that.
Well, I think, well, I come from a family where we don't shut up. So that was always good. Always some story. Usually it was maybe one you heard before, but then there's always the extra questions as you get older. You hear the story, then as you get older, you start asking, but what was that like? And then the story expands and the story expands and the story expands. And it's pretty soon you just know these characters. And it was important to my mother because her parents both died when she was one when she was 19 and one when she was 20. And they were older parents. And the only thing I know of them is the stories she would tell. So she would point to a picture and she'd tell a story about it. And that's how I knew them, because I don't recall. I mean, I was born within their lifetimes, but ever so briefly, I don't remember anything about them at all. But the stories she would tell, I can remember those stories. And I think that's how we keep people alive in our lives, is telling stories about them to other people. And then somebody can identify, oh yeah, something like that happened to me. Or, oh, that's really funny. I never imagined that could happen. And it's those stories that carry on memories of people, I think.
Yeah, we just had a show here, Laurie Anderson here at the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. And there was a room covered in black with chalkboard paint and graffiti on the wall that she had written lots of messages. And one was, you die 3 times. The first time when your heart stops, the second time when they put you in the ground, and the third time when no one says your name.
Oh, that's powerful.
Yeah. So what you said about that's how people live on is in our memories when we talk about them.
Yeah.
And I put in the chat the StoryCorps, which is a NPR piece that they do it a couple times a week, I think, where you just hear people talking about something. You hear parents, you'll hear a child who was a foster child talk about when they came to meet with their parents, and met their parents, and and their relationship with their parents, or parents who fought in a war. And so they in the StoryCorps, they have just various questions to get people started, like, how would you like to be remembered? When did you first fall in love? How has your life been different than what you'd imagined? Sort of what we do in table topics.
Yeah.
But to like really intentionally think about, what would you like to ask a family member? So I did get my very taciturn uncle to talk about falling in love, and he talks a lot. It's funny, he has a lot more stories about his paramour Mary, who's passed, than he does about himself.
but it's interesting when the first speech we give into Toastmasters is the icebreaker. And I've said this before. I thought, okay, icebreaker, talk about my life. And I thought, so here I am trying to jam 20 something years into this 4 to 6 minute speech, and it was just this whole list of facts. And I did it. I got it out of the way, and then the next week somebody gave their icebreaker, and it was a story about how he got his job, like the first job interview, his first job, and being a young person starting out. And so I'm listening to this one story and I'm thinking, well, he's not jamming all this stuff in. He needs to tell us. And afterwards they said, oh, we learned so much about you. And it dawned on me, like, wow, you really can learn a lot about a person from just a simple story. And that changed my whole perspective on icebreakers. because I've had people say, I don't really want to tell personal things about myself. Well,
Mm.
you can still do an icebreaker. You know, it's like one lady who had a really rough childhood, and she thought the icebreaker had to be about her childhood, and it was extremely bad. I said, no, you just talk about the last time you bought a car, or the best restaurant you've ever eaten in, or going to somebody's house for the holidays. And those are all stories about you that we learn about you, and those are icebreaker stories. So I think people don't think about that you can learn a lot about somebody from just one episode, how they
Mm.
react to one episode. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly true. I know that when I give icebreakers, it tends to be like a very narrow sliver, and then I try to relate it to Toastmasters.
Mhm. Yeah.
One of the things I really like about Toastmasters too is it just gives you that time to work on a story and figure out the best way to share it. And we have some members in our club at US Senate Toastmasters that we record our meetings and we record our speeches. And if people want them posted, we post them.
Mhm.
And one of our members is a grandfather, and he has some wonderful stories that he just wants to record because, at some point he won't be here and his grandchildren are very, very little, and they'll be able to see him and hear some family stories that he shared with us. And we enjoy hearing them. And
Mhm.
that's like a really nice way to, live on.
Yeah. It is, I always think about, like, I kind of joked around. I said, I want to, my mother had gotten a job at Kmart many years ago. And they said, oh, don't use that fitting room. It was like the last fitting room in the aisle. And she said, well, why is that? They go, well, somebody died in there. And she said, well, they're not in there now, are they? They said, no. This has been years ago. But you just, so here's obviously they cleaned it. Obviously the person was no longer there, but people wouldn't use that fitting room. And here was a story of somebody that just was just this anonymous person. So I kind of joked. I said, I want to die in a fitting room, because then years will pass and someone will say, my very first job I got, this lady went in this fitting room and she died. And then later someone else will say, my mother tells this story of the very first job she ever got. My great grandmother tells a story about the very first, and I thought I could live on in generations in these people's families just by dying
Mhm.
at the right place.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, when there's tragedies, people talk about it for forever. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and there's been, I'm in DC, so we do have unfortunately some murders, and so yeah, I know all the houses near me where there was something tragic, something
Yeah.
horrific,
So,
atrocious that happened, an atrocity.
yeah.
Yeah,
But it's true. I
but
mean, my next door neighbor was, her boyfriend was killed. And it's all of a sudden everybody's talking, oh, that's the house. That's
oh,
but it's tough. But yeah, I think tragedy, because it's something we need to discuss to have some closure, or some feeling like other people feel the same way we do.
yeah,
And then the other part is the really funny things. I think it's the funny stories. That's the ones I love. Like, you would never believe what happened. My shopping cart took off through the park, that kind of thing.
yeah.
And it's just those funny stories that people retell, even if it's not their story, because it's just funny.
Yeah, I think you're right, like processing trauma. I know I gave a number of speeches about January 6th after, what happened 2 years ago today. So
Oh,
shout out to all the staff and the police officers at the Capitol who still reliving a lot of that trauma.
oh yeah.
But also the humor of trying to pull together stories and uncover, like I said, uncover the humor, figure out ways to talk about things. I know my uncle, when I talked to him about his military service, he tends towards humor about it. Like most people, and I don't know if this is true now, but then he said, they promised me all these things and where I'd serve, and yeah, none of that happened. And I was allergic to wool, which my sergeant thought was unpatriotic. because he could his uniform would just give him the hives. So
Oh,
and so we, little things like that. But one thing I have found that Toastmasters is helpful is to improve your listening skills as well, because I think sometimes when we try to tell stories, people interrupt and say, oh, that happened to me. Let me tell you about this. And sometimes it's better to say, oh my, and give them space to keep talking or tell me more. And then you can sort of help them think that through.
yeah. Well, Barbara Walters just passed, and I can remember my father in middle school telling me, if you want to see someone who is able to have a fantastic conversation, the best conversationalist, you've got to watch Barbara Walters. She's also the best interviewer. And, I asked him why, and he said, well, think about it. He goes, watch her interview anybody. She starts with a question, and then she watches them. She doesn't look at her notes and go through her cards. And most interviews, the next question is something completely unrelated to the answer they just gave. He said she listens to their entire answer, then asks a follow-up question, then a follow-up question, until that conversation has just died a normal death.
Yeah.
Then she might pull out her cards for another topic, or she might ask them a question, an open-ended question. What is something about your career you're most proud of? And then but he says, if you really watch her though, she might look at her notes one time at the beginning of the interview, and the rest of it is just her listening and asking follow-up questions. He says that's a good conversation or a good interview. It could be either one, but it's listening and asking questions related to what they said instead of waiting to talk. And he says most people, and I was at that age too, he says most people, like you are now, wait to have somebody finish talking or pause so you can say something that you want to say. He says, but if you really listen and ask follow-up questions, you're going to learn a lot about them, learn a lot about something you probably didn't know about, and have a wonderful conversation.
So did you watch a lot of Barbara Walters?
Yeah. Because it's funny, you don't really notice she's so good at it until you see someone else on maybe even the same show interview. Like she was on I want to say, was she 60 Minutes or 2020?
2020.
Okay.
2020. Yeah.
And so you watch other people even on 2020 or on 60 Minutes who have their note cards, in their front of them, and they ask a question. And then while the person's talking, they're sorting through their note cards, and then the person finishes, they hear the pause, and they ask another question. It has nothing to do with it at all.
Yeah.
Just nothing. And after I saw Barbara Walters and then saw them, I went, oh.
Yeah.
And he says, and my father said, well, how would you feel if you were the person who was being interviewed and they didn't even listen to, wouldn't you just want to say, did you not hear a thing I said?
Yeah. They that is a lot of prep work, because you have to know the person and you have to be familiar with what you want to ask them about. I think sometimes you're interviewing a bunch of different people, you just get questions, they're just thrown on, you don't have time to do the prep work, but she really did. And so she got to know her folks really well. I think Oprah Winfrey does a really good job of this too. And I actually don't watch 60 Minutes anymore, because it's just so, I haven't watched it for decades, because and even NPR, Stephen Skeep or David Green, they're just so like their questions aren't helpful. They're like, okay, your opponent says this thing about you, just sort of repeating an attack point that may or may not be factual. Respond to that. It's not illuminating in any way.
Yeah.
And I think Bob Edwards, when he was with Morning Edition, he was great. He would ask like very succinct questions, about, well, what was your goal, or what, and then follow up and listen and reflect back. And I think a lot of times now it's just, somebody else has written these questions, I'm going to run through them and then not really listen to the answer. And I don't think it's illuminating for the audience. And I don't think it's that enjoyable for the participants either, because it's really hard to get your message across when, instead of saying, so why are you here? They're like, let me attack you in some general way that has nothing really to do with you, but it's tied to your party or what have you.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think if you look at what I consider good interviewers, they want to bring out the same points, or the same, like you call them attack points, which is true. And sometimes it's interesting to go back to what made you decide to go into law? You know, if the person's
Mm.
an attorney, or what did you never expect out of this career that you found? You know, those just questions that show that they're human beings. I think when you have them on there and they're just to attack them or attack their stance or attack their political, it's like, just okay, if that's the premise of the show, I'm probably not going to be interested in it. But if it's learning about the person, maybe it's somebody I don't agree with their politics, but maybe I can learn something about them that I didn't know that will make me appreciate them more.
Or
So
give
it's
them a chance, yeah, to explain their policy views or, yeah,
uh,
exactly.
or just even learn about them as a person. You know,
Yeah.
just I know every time I meet, like especially met people in the medical field, I'll ask, you know, what made you decide to go into this branch of medicine? And a lot of times they never even get asked that. It's always assumed people become doctors because of the money. And then you ask, what made you just pick this
Mm.
specialty? Like even the dentist, I have, my kids go to a pediatric dentist. So what made you pick pediatrics? Have you ever done regular? And hearing them talk about it. And it's kind of fun and interesting because if you give them time, they'll recount a story that was fun or interesting, or some mentor or somebody in their lives who persuaded them to go that direction. And it's just quite interesting to learn about people. Why did you choose this career? What do you like best about it? What do you like least about it? Or when somebody visits someplace, if somebody comes to Las Vegas for the first time, what did you think you would find that you didn't find? It's always interesting to
Yeah.
hear. And it's usually something very stereotypical. I
Yeah.
thought it would just be like naked people walking down the street. Okay. We have a reputation, but I've never seen that either. Or what is something that you didn't expect that you found? And most people say, well, the people are very friendly. Or interestingly, it'll be things like there's a whole, like it's just the strip. The strip is small compared to all the community around it. And then they'll say, I didn't expect there'd be this many houses and schools.
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
and I guess because the reputation is it's just touristy. But I
Yeah.
guess I could say the same thing about New York. I mean, I hear about New York City.
Yeah.
Then I've never to this day not been to New York City, but I've been to upstate New York and Cooperstown and the Niagara Falls. And so if somebody asked me what's something you didn't expect, well, somehow I just thought it'd be just like LA, just wall to wall cities,
Mhm.
just nothing but cities. And I didn't think about once you get out of the, New York City area, the greater area, it's just country. It's
Mhm.
just real beautiful countryside.
What have been some of your favorite Toastmasters stories about Las Vegas?
It's mostly it's people coming and not knowing what to expect.
Mm.
It's just one of mine is actually one of my own stories. And we first moved here, we stayed in one of these month-to-month apartments, which are usually in a less polite
More
part of
challenging.
town, And so we're driving past this billboard, and it has the women in nothing but suspenders.
Mhm.
Nothing but suspenders, and it says naughty girls. This was many years ago. And we're driving along, and my son was about 6 or 7, and he was very smart, real good reader. And all of a sudden he says, oh, I finally understand it. And I said, what? He says, those girls, they're really unhappy because all they have for clothes is those little suspenders, and that's why they're acting out and being naughty. And I said, it's probably it. That's probably, this is, yeah, you're right. But, so things like that you just don't think about. But also the different, or like any city, and you got the poor parts of town, the rich parts of town, just every bit of it. And it's most people who live here, if they don't work on the strip, never go to the strip unless somebody comes in from out of town.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only time I do touristy stuff is if friends come in from out of town. Then we do all the touristy stuff. Other than that, I rarely go to the strip for anything. I should. There's plenty there. We're a really cool city with
Yeah.
lots of shows, but it's just one of those you just like anybody. You live in your neighborhood. You go to work. You come home. You
Yeah.
shop in your neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of your stories about people coming to visit Washington D.C. for the first time?
Oh goodness. Mostly people come to DC and they just love it because it's so walkable and it feels like a European city, and it's just, and yeah, it's lots of people living, 700,000 people live here. We have more people living in DC than Vermont or Wyoming, but without the senators and without the reps, so without voting rights. But I think that I like being part of the Nevada Toastmasters, obviously because of my boss, but I get a different flavor for the state. So I loved a speech I heard about the Cowboy Poetry Festival in Elko, which I didn't know there was a Cowboy Poetry Festival. And it was thousands of people, and how they handled the COVID pandemic and the tensions that they had between the folks who didn't want any sort of pandemic procedures like masks or hand washing or social distancing, and the folks who would only come, if there was any of that, they wouldn't come. And then the folks were like, I'm not coming unless everybody's vaccinated and masked. And they're like, okay, we can't have the festival because we can't make both sides happy. So we'll skip this year and then we'll see what we do the next year. That's been interesting. Greg Moore and Lambda Linguist, which is my Nevada home club. He talks some stories about Lake Mead and just growing up around Lake Mead when it was full of water and all the boating, and then I've just heard really obviously very interesting speeches about the Las Vegas, and getting back to like the tragedies and the atrocities and the crime families and the robberies and but even like little stories really, it's just interesting. I know when I went to the Mob Museum, there was a section on Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up, and one section on the killing of Danny Green, who was a mobster. And there was a car bomb that killed him in Lyndhurst, which is at Brainerd and Lander, which is like right near my house. So the kid, I remember hearing that bomb. And then my neighbor, kind of diagonal from me, they showed up. The police came and tried to get the guy who lived there, Mr. Caroli, who was part of the plot to kill Danny Green, was my neighbor. So I remember playing, we were outside, and then like the SWAT team came and my mom like grabbed us and threw us in the basement. And then I talked to one of my neighbors who lived right next door to the Carolis, and she had a story about once when she drove her kids to school, she had a blue Impala, I think. And she would, as soon as she left her driveway and drove her kids to school, this other car would follow her, and they'd just be sitting on the block. And finally she called the police, like, this car is following me whenever I leave. And the police like, don't worry about it, it's not for you. And so my neighbor went and talked to Mr. Caroli, and it's like, what's going on? And she's like, you have the same car. And he said, yeah, I wondered if he'd ever figure that out, that he bought a blue Impala that was exactly like hers, so that when she left, then he would take off and the FBI would follow her and not him, because their driveways were next door.
Oh, God.
So I mean, if you don't ask questions, you never get great stories like that.
Yeah, I know, but it's fun to hear the stories like that, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we are almost out of time. Oh, sorry, something dropped. We're almost, I'm easily distracted. But so we're almost out of time. And I guess you won't be joining me next Friday. That's
I'm out of here. Yeah, sorry.
Well, you stay pretty busy. I will say Washington, D.C., I didn't know what to expect, but it's a beautiful city. And I did not expect everything would be free.
Great.
I mean, well, it's free because our tax dollars pay for it, but just there's so many things to see. But the best one, I'm racing down a hall because I have to stop at the ladies' room, and there's this huge line of like people and children on this one hallway in one of the Smithsonian's. And of course, I'm in too much of a hurry to notice. But as soon as I finish what I'm doing, I come back, and there's this long line, and I see one of the adults. I said, "What's going on?" She said, "Oh, it's a petting zoo." I said, "A petting zoo, but we're indoors." But these buildings are huge. It was an insect petting zoo. An insect. So these kids are lining up to like pet the tarantulas and the cockroaches and the giant roach. And I just, as I drove, I could walk back to the front, kind of peered in at the room, and here's all these kids lined up, and this woman holding this gigantic roach. Would you like to pet the roach? Like, oh, no, I'm good. You know, but it was funny. Just I never any place expected a cockroach, insect petting zoo.
I've been to, they have insect petting zoos at the Natural History Museum. They have musical instrument petting zoos at the Kennedy Center.
Oh,
So kids can try different instruments, which was amazing. My godson, when I took him, he just picked up a bugle and I was like, wow, you're really good at this.
wow. Naturally musical. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. And so tomorrow is TLI. Don't forget that. That's online only. And in 2 weeks will be the in-person only. So look for those things. Those are all coming up, and the newsletter's out now. So look for that. And all of everything in there has links if it's online, and has locations if it's in person. And I think that's it. So I will see you guys on Monday morning with Anita Della Croce. And I don't know who will be here next Friday, but we'll find someone. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Jean.